Hey folks, before we get into the video, if you'd like to request a movie for me to review on my channel, check out my Patreon page and select the tier that works best for you, and you'll be directly supporting the channel. The link to my Patreon page is in the description below. Thank you so much to my current patrons. Now let's get into the video. Plan 9 from Outer Space, directed by Ed Wood. This request comes from Lance Langford from the Horror Returns podcast. I'd never seen this film until this request, and I found it to be very charming. This film was released in 1959 and was dubbed the worst film ever made, and it's amassed a cult following as a so bad it's good film. And honestly, if I had seen this film growing up, I would have loved it and watched it over and over again. And even though I just watched this film, this is one that I would happily revisit time and time again. As I said at the beginning of this review, there's a lot of charm to this film. It's obvious that Ed Wood had a passion for filmmaking. Besides the charm, the film is laughably bad. From the props and set designs looking like they're made out of cardboard, to awful acting, and a really confusing script. There are these aliens who bring zombies back to life, and there's Vampira and Bela Lugosi. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It seems like Ed Wood was like, oh, I want to make a sci-fi movie, and I want to make a horror film, and all of these pieces don't make any sense. There's random test footage of Bela Lugosi that doesn't fit in with the film at all, as well as a really bad double of Lugosi, because unfortunately he had passed away before the film was released. Despite all the issues with the film, I still found it to be very enjoyable. It's so bad that it's good. There's a narrator who's obviously reading cue cards, the pilot with the script on his lap, as well as a detective who waves a gun around and points it at his own shoulder. It's so laughably bad, but ultimately really enjoyable. Despite all of its flaws, Plan 9 from Outer Space gets and adds to the collection. I had a lot of fun with this film, and it's one that I'd happily revisit. Ouija Origin of Evil, directed by Mike Flanagan. This review was requested by Corey from CDR Reviews. It's hard to believe that this is a prequel to the first Ouija film, which is absolutely terrible in my opinion. And the reason why I say this is because this film is far superior to the first film. The film takes place in 1967. We follow a young widow who is working out of her home as a spiritual medium, and she's accompanied by her daughters Paulina and Doris. They're still reeling over the recent death of Roger, which is Alice's husband and the kid's father. Alice incorporates a Ouija board into her readings, and while trying out the board, she unknowingly contacts a spirit that then possesses Doris. I'm a big fan of Mike Flanagan's films, from his criminally underrated Oculus and Dr. Sleep to the massive hit that was The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. Flanagan has always struck a really great balance between character and story development and consistently delivering real scares. And while there are some jump scares, they're all nearly effective except for the one at the end of the film, which suffers from the same kind of ending that Sinister has. And just like Sinister, this is a film that's often overlooked. The acting in this is top-notch, which is to be expected from a Mike Flanagan film. Specifically, the young girl who plays Doris. At the beginning of the film, she's this innocent, sweet young girl, but then when she becomes possessed, she has that creepy Damien vibe to her from The Omen. The creep factor is increased by the use of sound design and lack thereof. The way this film is shot is beautiful. It feels like a film that could have been made in the late 60s or early 70s, and you even see cigarette burns, which were used in film to let the projectionist know to change the reel. I don't really mind the use of CGI in this film. It's done pretty effectively, and when Doris' eyes completely go white and she has this manic look on her face, it's truly terrifying. I feel like the ending was a bit of a letdown though, and although this isn't my favorite Mike Flanagan film, I'd highly recommend this to anyone who's looking for a good possession movie. With all that said, Ouija Origin of Evil gets an add to the collection. This is a film that I revisit every couple of years, and every time it's an enjoyable watch. Christine, directed by John Carpenter. This review was requested by Lee from Liebelman Reviews. Christine is a John Carpenter film that I didn't discover until later, and it's one of my favorite films by John Carpenter, as well as one of my favorite Stephen King adaptations. The film takes place in 1978. We follow Arnie, who is an awkward teen, and his one friend is Dennis, who's a football player. And Arnie's life changes when he buys a used red and white 1958 Plymouth Fury. The car needs extensive repairs. Arnie then starts to work on restoring the car, and over time, he starts dressing more like a 1950s greaser, becomes arrogant, paranoid, and completely obsessed with his car, Christine. There's a lot to love about this film. With it being directed by John Carpenter, you know that you're in for a quality film. And the cast is overall really great, especially the actor who portrayed Arnie. I love his transformation in this film from timid to terrifying, and the film really sells the idea that Christine has taken complete hold of him. And speaking of Christine, this has some of my favorite practical effects in a John Carpenter film. And funny enough, Carpenter had originally not planned to film the car's regeneration scenes, but Roy Arbogast, the special effects supervisor, came up with a way for the car to rebuild itself. So he and his team made rubber molds from one of the cars, including a whole front end. One of the cars was stripped of its engine to accommodate internally mounted hydraulics that pulled the framework inward. Then the shot was run backwards for the film. That way it gave the illusion that the car was rebuilding itself. I also love the stunt work in this film. From explosions to lighting cars on fire, just a host of stunts that I thoroughly enjoy. I also love the music. There's of course an original score by John Carpenter, which is one of my favorites that he's done, and one that I feel like is often overlooked. And then you also add in Christine that's playing music from the 1950s, and that in itself is one of her major character attributes. Depending on how she's feeling, what's happening in a particular scene, the music will shift and it'll portray whatever emotion she's feeling in that moment. And even though this film doesn't necessarily scare me, I do find it to be an overall enjoyable film. So for me, Christine gets an add to the collection. This is in my top 5 John Carpenter films, and it's one that I revisit at least once a year. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for coming by, and I'll see you guys in the next video.